Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in today's video, we are going to do a What's New in Fusion for November of 2025. So like we do with all these videos, I'm not going to cover every single update. We don't do a lot of PCB on this channel, even though we have courses. We have a couple videos on the channel. We have a course on learneverythingaboutdesign.com. But again, for a lot of these sort of topics, we're not going to cover them. We're going to focus on design related stuff, UI improvements or changes, and get to the core of that. Now, if you want to see all that's changed, you can always go to the help menu, go to what's new. I'll also just put a link to the blog post in the description of this video if you want it. So in this video, I'm going to try to get through this. I've already crashed Fusion twice, so that doesn't bode well, but hopefully we can get through this, and I'll talk about what crashed it and kind of what's going on. So first things first, the general UI, there have been some minor changes, things that I noticed because I'm in Fusion every day. Most people might not notice, but things like the folder icons are different. The icons for bodies and components are different. They went back to a colored icon. So before this was like a gray cylinder, and now it's back to blue. The surfaces are orange. This kind of is a throwback to how it was before. They didn't go way back where we used to have a light bulb icon instead of the eyeball, but they did change back some of these things. The font on things like comments and browsers has changed. Icon sizes has changed. The borders around the tabs on the top, they're no longer divided, so they all kind of blend together, which I personally don't like. So that is, that's changed a little bit. Some icons are different, like the SVG icon used to be yellow and white. Now it's black and white. I don't know why these things change, honestly, but again, there are these little sort of pops of differences in the UI. And there are some new tools, things like bounding solid. Now, this is a tool that did exist in Fusion, but it is now sort of open and available to us just in the standard design workspace. One thing I've noticed, so this has kind of been a long-term thing about getting high resolution icons so that scaling of the toolbar and stuff could happen. I've noticed that the three dots on the right-hand side to do things like pin to toolbar doesn't really fit anymore. So I'm not sure if that's a sort of UI scaling issue or not. I'm on a 1080 monitor. I don't have 4K monitors. And I would imagine that on 4K, the scaling is probably different, and that's probably different. But I'm not going to worry about that. So those are just kind of some basic UI things. If you happen to update and launch Fusion and you're running a dark theme on your operating system, you may have noticed that it automatically inherited that. So I really hate it when software companies do this. Microsoft does it, Adobe does it, Fusion does it. Pretty much everybody, they toss things in and they make it default. And I wish that wouldn't happen. So basically what happened with this update is match device theme is on by default. And what this does is it will inherit the device, like if in this case I'm on Windows 11 because Windows 10 is not supported anymore. In this case, it'll inherit that. But since I have manually selected a different environment, I'm using a photo booth background, it keeps the screen white. So this is not a good setup in my mind. If you're using the default theme, it'll change it to a darker background. I personally, when I'm doing 3D modeling, I prefer a light theme. I prefer the white screen and then the objects that I'm creating to be darker. My own personal preference, I leave plasticity by default mainly for videos, but if I was using it every day, I would toggle that background to something different. With that, there is a secondary option. If you go into the, where is it? Materials. Yeah, it's all up here. If you go into materials, there's now this exposure slider. And let's drag this out of the way a little bit. So now you can kick the exposure up, which will help brighten up those objects. You can also kick it down. So if you are working in a light theme and you want the object to be darker, if it's too bright, then you can do that. For me personally, again, I'm going to go back to the light theme. I'm going to apply that and let it figure out what it's doing. And I'll go back and reset mine to photo booth. So again, that option to match the device theme was already there from the last update when we got the dark theme option. But for some reason, they pushed it to match the OS, which by default, which I don't understand. Please don't do that. If you're a developer listening, don't do that. Don't don't push these settings by default on everybody. Allow us to make that decision. All right, so that's the OS settings. That's the canvas exposure. Another thing that's kind of changed in general that I haven't been able to validate is the rotation based on the view cube. In the past, so let's just back this up a second. So one thing that used to happen is when you would rotate, basically holding down shift in the middle mouse wheel, you would get a green dot at the center of rotation that you could set. That doesn't seem to be available anymore. I've tried constrained orbit and I've tried free orbit, and I can't get that green dot to come back anymore. I don't know why that disappeared. What they did change was the rotation based on the view cube is supposed to be about the object. I haven't really been able to validate that. So essentially what happened is if your object is like really far away from the coordinate system, and let's just see if it won't work on this model, but basically if it's really far away from the coordinate system and you rotate it around, it would be well outside the view. And it's supposed to rotate about the center of the object that's selected. So, if you have a component selected, it's supposed to rotate about that. So you can kind of see that it works. It's using that as a rotation point. But honestly, so for me, when I'm modeling, very rarely, if that's a case where this thing's kind of way over here, or I'm zoomed in on an object like a specific feature, and then I rotate, very rarely do I have that entire body or component selected. So while I think that this is a nice option and it does solve some problems, it doesn't really get to the root of the issue because that only works if you've got something selected. And so I'm pretty sure that's what is happening with the view cube orbit change with the update. If you find this helpful, let me know, leave a comment and see if this improves your workflow. For me personally, I would have to remember to click on something and do that. Another just quick side note, this is not new, but if you click on an edge or a feature, it's going to highlight it. You can, in some cases, you can find it in the timeline. You can find it in the browser. If you hold down the left mouse button, you get a list of parent features. So it'll go all the way back up to the component, the cylinder head, the features, the edge, the extrude, the pattern, and so on. If you double click that, it'll select the entire component. So that can be helpful if you're trying to do things like copy something or find it in the timeline easier. So if you just click this, sometimes if you've got a huge timeline, that doesn't really help. But if you double click it and it highlights it, that can help you see it. So just that's aside. That's not an update. That's just kind of a quick aside with this right here. All right. So performance. I have to talk about performance. I've mentioned this in videos before. Every time there's a claim of a performance improvement, I haven't seen it. I've been using Fusion for, I guess, almost 10 years at this point. And ever since the updates have claimed a performance improvement, I have not personally found that to be true. I've seen negative impacts on performance in some cases, or kind of it staying the same. But in the past year of all the improvements where it's, loading models quicker or, calculating something quicker, I haven't been able to quantify or even say that I've noticed that difference. If you have or have not, if it's gotten better or worse for you, leave a comment. I know I've gotten a lot of comments in other videos where they've talked about it getting worse, and that's kind of my experience. So I think that it's going to be based a lot on the user's computer, the types of models, how the models are structured. This one's all internal components except for one external component. I think a lot of these different nuanced differences have an impact on that. The approach that you take to modeling and so on. There's no really performance test in here. We do have support and diagnostic, and we can report performance issues in here, and we can basically open up the service utility and get some information about the system. We can get some information about network diagnostics and stuff like that. But we don't have a true bench test where we could have a default model and have it run through this bench test and actually quantify those performance gains. That would be nice to have, especially with the claims that the performance is improving. But again, I haven't personally seen it. Another thing that we need to talk a little bit about is data. So this is a tricky one to convey because there are some differences. If you use bill of materials, or if you are currently using the manage extension, for example, or configurations, or even just properties. So if you go to a component and we take a look at the properties, all of this, in addition to several other things, all of this is different. It's a different user experience based on when you have set up your Autodesk account. So starting in March of this year, 2025, new hubs or new Autodesk accounts that were created started to get what they are calling, it's basically, you'll see CE listed everywhere. It's basically collaborative editing. This opens up a lot of different features, and it's moving towards something that I can't really discuss at this point. It's not public, but if you're on an insider build, you'll probably have experienced this. But essentially, there are different things displayed in the properties dialog. You have different options in your bill of materials. When we save a design, we actually have a different experience. So if I do a save on this design right now, it's probably what you're seeing as well. You'll get a version description and the ability to create a milestone. When you move over to the new CE style hubs, which is happening automatically, it's a gradual process. I don't know when it starts and I don't know when it ends, but you will no longer see that little dialog box pop up when you save, for example. Instead, you'll have to right click and you'll go to history. And inside of the history, basically inside of history, you will automatically be given these versions that are happening. And the milestone is going to be what's now called a version. And so right now, if the older hubs are using milestones, the newer ones it'll be a version that we create. And there are going to be distinctions or differences between how those are treated in like PDM systems and so on. And again, this is why I don't really want to get into it in this video, because it's a big complicated topic that's changing all the time. But if you're looking at the blog post, if you go up and you go to what's new and you're looking through and you see collaborative editing and you don't really sure what that means, it's going to be this new hub and this new experience. Now, what's a little bit kind of difficult is if you've got a current hub, you can go in and you can actually enable, if you're an admin, you can enable collaborative editing, but it's not the same thing. So even if you go in and enable that essentially will give you different access. Okay, let's take a step back. At the core of this, we've got things like folder level permissions. So these projects that are different. We've got collaborative editing, which is basically going to allow you to manipulate metadata in designs without requiring a new save. So what happens in a lot of CAD systems, especially once you get into PDM, PLM systems, is the properties associated with the design. And when I say properties, I mean things like, at a very basic level, things like part number, description, manufacturer, part number, material, all those kinds of things. Even the state, if it's a working state or if it's released or in production, that kind of stuff. All that data is going to be independent of the CAD data. Not independent is not linked, but you can modify it and not have to save it. So right now, if I go into this cylinder component and I say, I'm just going to add a description that just says cylinder, and I close. That now triggers me to save the file, which means that now I have an update, and now I have another version, which really has no noticeable 3D modeling differences. And so this kind of changes collaborative editing environment is kind of moving away or moving towards the ability to disassociate 3D modeling changes from metadata changes. So we don't have to just up version because we changed the description of a part or something like that. So I know that was a long description, but if you see all these things like changes to configurations and stuff that you see in a configuration table and you go in and you don't actually see it, that's why. And that's because it's an experience that's changing for users, and it's going to change over time. If you're a new user from April to now, that's what you'll see. If you are a legacy user, if you've had Fusion since before that, or if you're a hobby user, I don't know how that transition is going to go. But just keep that in mind. If you see anything with CE or collaborative editing in the What's New, you're probably not going to see it by default. Okay, so all that was performance, general stuff. There are some other changes that have happened to things like the selection tool. Select by size now has a component option in here and a little drag bar. Again, there are all these little changes that happen that I don't generally talk about. I do want to mention the new tool in here, Bounding Solid. This is kind of a nice tool. So if you do manufacturing and you need to create a stock body representation of your part, you can use this to create a solid body that is a body that's connected to your component. It's going to be independent. And when I mean independent, it's not going to replace it, but you can use it as sort of this space claim bounding box. You can use it as stock as part of your manufacturing setup. And it's just an automated tool. And the great thing about this is it will take the coordinate system of your component. So a lot of times when you use tools like, if we go into selection and select by boundary and I select this, it's based on the coordinate system. And the coordinate system of the part is different than the orientation of that specific component. And so when we use tools like this to try to figure out the size of a part to generate a stock, is if it's in the right orientation, that's fine. If it's not, it becomes kind of a pain in the butt. So this is a nice tool, a nice addition. Bounding Solid, I believe that tool has kind of been around for a little while, but it's been nested in other areas for things like generative design, and now they've just kind of exposed it here. All right, so let's talk about a couple of updates. So one update happened to the fillet tool. So the fillet tool has been around obviously for forever. And we've got a couple of types of fillets. So we've got the standard fillet. We've got rule fillet, which is basically, so if you think about, let's say an extrude that has a ton of sketch-based holes in it. Well, the rule fillet can go based on a feature and apply fillets to all of those holes. A full round fillet's pretty straightforward. Select 3 faces and it'll make a full round. But with the default fillet and rule fillet, we now have the ability to change to an asymmetric fillet. So an asymmetric fillet is nice because what we can do is we can make it shorter on one side and longer on another. So again, with parts like this airplane engine is part of our assembly course on learneverythingaboutdesign.com. And with a part like this, you oftentimes will have features like these holes where we can't just apply a normal fillet or a normal chamfer based on how close they are to an edge. But using something like an asymmetric fillet on a part like this could be a nice option. Keep in mind that if we use this asymmetric option, we do lose the ability to drive tangency or curvature continuity in that fillet. So while this is a nice option for these types of mechanical parts, we do also have to think about one, manufacture. How hard is it to actually cut that fillet? And two, if this is like a complex surfacing type part, do we need the ability to go back and drive the edge tangency or edge continuity based on the surrounding geometry? So what I would say to that is play around with it, see if it works for you. If you're 3D printing stuff, it obviously isn't going to matter nearly as much. It actually will potentially be a good benefit because you can control the fillet in the build orientation. So as you're building up in Z, the closer that fillet is tangent to the vertical direction, the better the layer lines will build. As you get closer to horizontal, you start to have problems. So if you can make the fillet gradually transition and then have a tight transition at the top, it'll probably print better. Another thing that changed, we mentioned in the last update, constrain components. So this is a new way to think about putting assemblies together. We've typically had joints and as-built joints, which are a great way for us to determine the motion based on essentially the coordinate systems, right? A selected location. Constraints, however, are looking at putting components together based on selections of things like faces and edges. And what's changed for this update is the ability to now do center. So basically we can center a component between two faces. So if we say, let's go ahead and take, let's see. Select face 1 and face 2. And then this one will select this face, and it will center those. So we're going to add that, and then we'll do maybe a concentric. We'll add that, and maybe do concentric with this one. We'll add that. Outside face here, and then we'll say okay. All right, so now we've added those constraints. This thing can move around. It's a different process than if you're applying a joint. You can still have motion. So for example, we've constrained it left and right based on being directly in the middle of those faces, and we can still rotate this piece back and forth. We could enable contact sets. So if we come in here and enable contact sets, and we come in and we do all bodies, or if we add it specifically between these two, it'll stop when it hits that piece. So we can use these constraints as a way to put assemblies together, and it is a different process. I'll likely do some updates to our assembly modeling course on learneverythingaboutdesign.com talking about this, but it is something that is changing, and we're likely not going to update until early next year when more of these changes get added. Another thing that we want to talk about is edit in place. So I personally prefer to use the default modeling approach in Fusion, where I have all my components and bodies and stuff in one design. For the type of modeling I typically do, that works for me. I do have external components in some cases, depending on what it is, but if you are a person that uses external components in a lot of your designs, you've likely run into this where you can't go in and change the visibility of components or bodies. You can't change the opacity of them. You can't hide and show sketches. And that was something that was kind of a pain in the past. You couldn't even go in and do edit in place and take care of that. But with this update, we now have the ability to change some of these visibility properties. So for example, we can go in and we can modify things like the display color and change opacity and whether or not it's even visible at all. And so those kinds of changes are nice, especially if you use this edit in place workflow. So the next thing that we likely want to talk about is sheet metal. This is another update where it's kind of like, why? In my opinion. So in the last update, when we got an update to sheet metal, essentially lofted flange was broken out of the flange tool. Now it still exists in flange. You can still go to lofted flange. But one of the main reasons they did this is because they had the ability to create a different icon in the timeline. Well, the big update that happened here is flange, which is a base flange, basically a closed profile, contour, which is a 2D sketch, an open sketch, or the edge flange, where if you go in and you just select an edge and pull this out, those each now have their own icon. So the base flange, the contour flange, and edge flange. So now we've got 4 flange icons: the loft, the base, the edge, or the contour, that can be displayed directly in the timeline. And so I think the idea behind this is to make it easier to find those features in the timeline. But in reality, the way that I do this is by selecting the feature on the screen. So for example, if I select this, it highlights the sheet metal component, and then it also highlights the edge flange itself. If I select this face, you can see it highlights the combine. If I select this face, it goes back to the original contour flange. This one here picks up this last edge flange. And so to me, the individual icons didn't really make that much of a difference for my workflow, but maybe that's a great point for a lot of people. So I understand why they did it. It's a little bit different because Loft got actually its own button in the toolbar, but the rest of these are still baked into the default flange based on your selection. So if you select an edge, you get an edge flange. If you select a 2D sketch, you get the contour. If you select a closed 2D sketch, you'll get the base, and so on. So that's the change that really happened to sheet metal there. There are some other changes that happened in just Fusion in general. And so 2 of the changes happened in the rendering workspace. One is an improvement to snapping the ground to an object. Now there's supposed to be some sort of on-screen indicator snapping to something, but from what I've seen, so when I typically use this, it's for things like a car. And when I select geometry, it snaps to the center of that. If I were to select this point, it'll snap to the point, but that obviously doesn't help us with the ground. So, there are some improvements here. So if you are snapping to the bottom of, let's say, a consumer product or a machine part that's got a flat base, then that can be really helpful. For something like this, for the cylinder, it goes to the center of it. And so for me, that's not really as helpful as if it just snapped to the ground. Another thing that changed is the decals. So decals historically have not really taken the scaling from the image file into account. And that could cause a problem, especially if you've got a specific sized image. They've now updated that so it can not do any scaling and it can actually stick or adhere to the original size. So if you are making decals that go in a very specific location, like let's say it's a 2-inch by 2-inch sticker, it can now maintain that size. The last honorable mention, actually, no, let's talk about drawings. There are a couple of additions to just, again, Fusion in general, but one of the changes to drawings that I think is actually pretty helpful is now when you add tolerances, there is a limit and fit option. So the limit option is a pretty nice tolerancing option, but the fit option is really what I think is a nice improvement. So for example, you can pick whether it's a hole or a shaft, which is going to change the fit. You can tell whether it's clearance, whether it's a transition or interference. You can also do a preferred fit. So if you know specifically which one it's going to be. This is important because Fusion, at least at this point in time, still does not allow you to enter tolerancing values at the sketch or design level. And so if you're creating something like a hole in a design, let's say, when you create a hole in a design, let's say it's a tapped hole, and actually let's do this different. Let's do thread, and let's just do thread in this hole. So if you are, applying this, typically, depending on which type of thread you're using, you'll get things like the class. And that information comes through in the drawings in the way of adding things like hole and thread notes. And so that information will convey. Now, if you've got a design for something like a shaft or a hole or something, you do not have that same note that's going to come through, because typically those things would be revolved cuts or extrudes through parts. So having the ability to add this fit type of tolerance is something that is actually pretty important. I hope and wish that that kind of information will begin to get embedded in the design. But right now, at least being able to add it in a detailed drawing is something that's helpful. Okay, the last thing that I really want to mention, and part of this is I want to mention because we just released a new course on our website, learneverythingaboutdesign.com, for Introduction to CAM. So we cover 2-axis, 2.5, 3, and multi-axis toolpaths in that course. And we generally on this channel haven't historically done a lot of CAM content, but if you are looking for it, you can check that course. I'll leave a link in the description. But sort of the honorable mention, one of the things that I thought was really helpful that updated in the manufacturer workspace was the ability to machine over holes and pockets. So this is something that has existed in a few toolpaths, like Geodesic, I think, had it. Now it's enabled in all 3D toolpaths. So if you are somebody that is I'll just go ahead and do it in this one. If you are somebody that is using CAM or the manufacturer workspace and you are trying to create toolpaths over holes, then what you would typically have seen in the past is you would have to go in and create a surface to patch that hole. Now you have the ability to basically go over those holes, to skip past them. So again, these are helpful options for anybody that's doing toolpath creation. There are other things that have changed. A lot of it happens in the manufacturing extension. stuff that's happened in additive manufacturing, multi-axis toolpaths, and so on. So we're not going to get into it here, but I did think at least the machining over holes and pockets was a nice enough addition that I did want to talk about it. So I think that's going to cover everything that I wanted to cover on what's new. This video ended up being longer than I thought it would be at about 30 minutes, but there was a lot that changed. Even though a lot of it's minor, there was a lot of little things that changed. If you have any questions on any of it, please leave a comment. If things have gotten better or worse for you in terms of Fusion performance, or if you like or don't like the updates, let me know in the comments as well. Obviously, on this channel and just in general, I'm a big proponent of Fusion. I'm not paid or sponsored to make Fusion content. Obviously, we're an affiliate for things like Quick Surface and Plasticity, but we're not an affiliate for Autodesk or Fusion. It's just kind of my CAD package of choice, even though I use SolidWorks and Inventor and other stuff. Fusion is still kind of one that I think represents, it has a lot of value, a lot of return on investment for those that are looking to use it in both a private sort of hobbyist or a professional capacity. So I love to know what people think about it. And if you have any questions or comments, let me know. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.